2 congressional districts, 4 candidates, and tonight they'll be discussing the issues that affect you and all of the tri-state. Local 12 News, along with the American Jewish Committee and the Jewish Community Relations Council, present the 2020 Congressional Forum. Now, live from the Meyerson Jewish Community Center in Amberley Village, here is tonight's moderator, Paula Todi.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Meyerson Jewish Community Center. In years past, this room would be filled with people eager to hear from the congressional candidates, but this is a year unlike any other year. So with the pandemic, we've had to do some social distancing with the candidates. They are separated, and we do have a few family and friends out in the audience tonight. Here's what you can expect. In many ways, what you will see will look like a debate, but we call it a forum in hopes that it encourages more discussion of the issues. The candidates in each district will discuss issues in 5-minute segments with the time shared equally. Each candidate will also have 30 seconds for a closing statement, and the order of the closing candidates' statements was determined by a coin toss that happened prior to tonight's debate. Forum. Ohio's 2nd District covers much of southern Ohio. It stretches from the east side of Cincinnati and Hamilton County, hugging the Ohio River, all the way to the eastern edge of Scioto County. It includes all of Claremont, Brown, Adams, Highland, and Pike counties, as well as part of Ross County. Now, a bit about the 2nd District candidates. Jane Castle is 43 years old. She is a teacher in the Cincinnati Public Schools and has a bachelor's degree in secondary education from Miami University. This is her first run at political office. She is married with 2 children, and they live in Mount Washington. Brad Winstrop is 62 years old. He has a bachelor's degree from UC, a medical degree from Rosalind Franklin University. He has worked as an orthopedic surgeon before entering politics. He also served in the Army Reserve, rising to the rank of colonel. And he is in his 4th term representing the 2nd District. He lives with his wife and 2 children in Columbia, Tusculum. Ms. Castle, Mr. Winstrop, thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Now for the 1st District. It is comprised of western Hamilton County, part of northern and northeast Hamilton County, and all of Warren County. And here's a little bit about the candidates in District 1. Kate Schroeder is 43 years old. She holds a bachelor's degree in political science from Indiana University and an MBA from the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. She has been a member of the Cincinnati Board of Health and worked for the Clinton Health Access Initiative. Ms. Schroeder, along with her husband and daughter and son, live in Clifton. Steve Chabot is 67 years old. He has an undergraduate degree from the College of William and Mary and a law degree from Northern Kentucky University. Mr. Chabot is completing his 12th term in Congress, and before that served on Cincinnati City Council and as a Hamilton County Commissioner. He and his wife have 2 adult children and 2 grandchildren. They live in Westwood. Welcome, Ms. Schroeder and Mr. Chabot.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And because of our coin toss, we are going to start with the District 1 candidates this evening. First, Ms. Schroeder. If COVID continues to surge and in the absence of a vaccine, what is the role of Congress to strike a balance between personal safety and business restrictions?
Thank you, Paula. And I just want to start by saying thank you to Channel 12, to the AJC and JCRC for hosting us here tonight, and also to the Meyerson JCC. I am usually here watching my daughter's basketball or wrangling kids in the family locker room. So it is a pleasure to be here in this way tonight. And you've asked a really important question about how do we move forward and what is the role of the federal government in COVID relief. And the role of the federal government, first and foremost, is to understand that our economic response and our public health response are interrelated. So these are not 2 alternatives. The stronger our public health response, the sooner and more safely we can reopen the economy, and we need to do both at the same time. And so I do think the role of Congress is to provide additional relief so we can strengthen both. First, I would say we need widespread testing. We have the opportunity now with antigen testing, the rapid tests coming out, that we have to have widespread testing for everyone because that's how we're going to be able to identify who is positive and manage transmission and getting them out of the community exposure. We also need support for small businesses. We need extended PPP, extended unemployment insurance. We need support for our schools and our postal services. I have a kindergartner and a second grader who are in Cincinnati Public Schools. They went back to school for the first time in 6 months last week. They are in a hybrid plan. They go 2 days a week. And they both said it was the best day of their lives. It is so hard as a parent to have a kindergartner who can't read doing virtual school. It doesn't work, and we need to support our schools so that they have the equipment, the PPE, personal protective equipment, to be able to open safely, as well as our local and state governments. They need support. And so the role of the federal government really is to both invest in the public health response in terms of widespread testing and treatment availability, as well as providing that economic relief so we can get out of this together.
Mr. Chabot?
Thank you. And I want to thank everyone for participating in the debate this evening and those that are watching at home. Obviously, COVID-19 hit this community, our state, the country, and the entire globe very hard. And obviously in our country, we've had over 220,000 deaths, and that's the most horrific thing about this, and the families that lost loved ones. So we did need to act, and fortunately in Washington, Congress, the President, we did act, and fortunately we did this in a bipartisan manner for the most part. Past several pieces of legislation, the principal piece of legislation is the CARES Act. And one of the things within the CARES Act was the PPP, which my opponent has mentioned. I'll get there in a second. But there were other things, funding for our first line folks, the nurses and the doctors and our frontline responders, and for the schools and for our hospitals and for our state and local government entities. So there was funding in there. It was a $2.2 trillion bill. Now, part of that was the PPP program. I happen to be the ranking member, the lead Republican on the House Small Business Committee. I'm the former chair of that committee, but for the last two Congresses, worked very closely with the Democratic chairwoman, Nydia Velasquez, on that committee. And we worked together to craft, to implement the PPP program, Paycheck Protection Program. It saved so many small businesses who are going to go under due to this pandemic because government action shut those down because we were trying to flatten the curve to save as many lives as possible. And I'm proud to say that our community, the first district, we received more money than any other district in Ohio, almost $3 billion. More small businesses got loans, over 17,000 got loans. And most importantly, over 250,000 jobs were saved right here in our area, in the greater Cincinnati area, in the first district. 256,000 jobs were saved, and that helped the small businesses, obviously, and those employees. But most importantly, it helped those families to get through this. So what the key is to continue to work in a bipartisan manner. I'm trying to get a second round right now. Unfortunately, Speaker Pelosi has been blocking this. I have a phone call tomorrow morning with Nydia Velasquez and Marco Rubio and Senator Cardin, who are the two senators on the other side. So we're trying to get another round through.
I'm going to have to call time, but I'm going to give Ms. Schroeder 30 seconds for rebuttal.
Thank you. We need relief now. We need to spend less time focusing on the CARES Act, which was great and absolutely needed, but people are suffering. Our country is less than 5% of the world's population, and yet we are roughly 20% of the deaths. We need relief packages, restaurants, but it is estimated that by the end of the year, 85% of independent restaurants will be closed. We are seeing about one a day here in Cincinnati. And it is because we have members in Congress that are playing politics. We have got to be up at night. The congressman has voted against the two most recent bills. He voted against $829 million for the city of Cincinnati.
Right. Thank you.
She just attacked me. I need to respond to that. She said I voted against two bills.
30 seconds.
The reason I voted against the bills that she's referring to, first of all, $3.3 trillion, huge spending. They also had in there, Pelosi made these very political. For example, illegal immigrants, the direct payments, the $1,200 and $2,400 went to illegal immigrants. Couldn't support that. Also, it took away the state's rights to have voter IDs like our driver's license at the polling places, so there'd be more fraud. So you cannot possibly support something like that. So.
All right, thank you. We're going to move on to District 2, and we are going to start with Ms. Castle. It has been said that women and minorities will be left behind economically the most in this pandemic. Many have had to cut back on their work hours. Many have actually quit jobs to go home and care for children. What would you do to restore economic equality?
Thank you, Paula. Thank you so much for our hosts today, too. This is a beautiful facility at Meyerson, and thank you, the AGC, for this opportunity. This whole pandemic, I feel like, was a lost opportunity from leadership. From the very beginning, I feel like they knew more about what was happening and could have given more guidance. Being an educator, I feel like the schools should have had more guidance and resources right away. We could have been planning a system that worked for women and caregivers months ago. We should have had the resources and the space and the extra teachers in place so that women wouldn't have to leave the workforce like they have. Women have for a very long time given up their careers or advancement to take care of the family. Myself included, I took a break from teaching to raise my children. And that means I'm not going to have a lucrative career that I maybe could have, especially for folks in the business fields. So what we need to do now is make sure we can get the schools open safely, that they have the resources that they need. The government from the federal level needs to make sure that we have the unemployment protections as well for folks that can't go back to work. Maybe they have to stay home and take care of folks. Maybe they are immunocompromised and can't be out there with the COVID raging right now. I think your original question was, can we open or should we close? Because right now in Hamilton County, we are on the verge of turning purple. And everyone wants to know what that means. Does that mean the schools close, businesses close? We need to navigate that. And I feel like the federal government should be stepping up right now in a bipartisan way to give relief.
Mr. Winstrop, your response.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the question. You know, before the pandemic hit, we had record low levels of unemployment for women and minorities. And obviously the pandemic has harmed us all in many ways, which goes to the importance of reopening and reopening safely. And that is what we can do. My kids are 6 years old and 3 years old, and they're going to school every day. And they're going safely, and there hasn't been a problem. There is no doubt that we need to do more from the federal level, but also from the state and local level, to know that we can do these things safely, and we must proceed in that direction. And that will be a big help. I have been a proponent also of trying to expand people into childcare as providers of childcare, because that is extremely important, especially for women, as you mentioned, that are staying home to take care of their kids, to become their teacher, which we saw in our home while we were shut down. And so it's important that we have an ample supply. And so I'm also looking at ways that we can expand people to go into and be certified in child care and reopen those safely as well, or else it's going to be very difficult to get people back into work. So between the schools and child care, I think that's a solution, and get back to the type of economy that we had before the pandemic. The things that were working can work again.
Ms. Castle, would you like to respond?
I think the systems that were in place before the pandemic, they've shown their cracks, and we can't go back to the way it was completely. We need to improve on those systems. There is so much cost attributed to child care, and we need to relieve that for families in some way that makes sense. We need to keep that preschool promise, because that frees up that time too, that they're not home caregiving, but they can be in the workforce. There are things that we need to fix. We just can't go back to the status quo of before the pandemic. Before everything shut down, there were problems. Families were struggling. Think of all the single mothers as well. We need to support them because they need to support their families. So we need to step it up and do better.
Mr. Winstrop?
Yeah, if I can. I'm glad that that was mentioned, because I actually have proposed a bill in Ways and Means Committee where HSAs, health savings accounts, and FSAs that are there are components of those that are there for child care. I have a bill to expand those, to allow more dollars to go into that for families, and to extend the length of time that they are available right now because of the pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Chabot, with the deaths of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd and others, it has led to discussion nationally on historical racism and racial injustice. When it comes to police, what are specific reforms that you would support?
Well, I've introduced legislation on that very topic. It's called the Safer Communities Act. It'll do a couple of things. We had obviously a horrific incident in Cincinnati where Timothy Thomas was killed down and over the Rhine. We had riots here in our community. The community was very divided. But we came together. It took a while, but we came together. Clergy, the police, community leaders, and they came together with the Cincinnati Collaborative Agreement. And we've had not perfect, but we've had much better police-community relations since that time. So after the horrific George Floyd killing, which never should have happened, and those officers should be held accountable and will be held accountable, I introduced this bill. That's one of the things we would do is make that collaborative a model for other cities across the country that are having difficulties. In addition to that, we had a police officer, a retired police officer that was killed, David Dorn, in St. Louis. Since he was 77 years old, African-American gentleman, was killed, but he wasn't entitled to federal funding because he was a retired police officer. So this would allow retired police officers to have access to that for their families, their children, education, that sort of thing. And finally, most of the cops are good and do the right thing and care about their communities. There's a few bad cops out there. And the final thing this would do was to make sure that those disciplinary records are available to other communities who may be hiring police officers, so you just don't have one cop go into another community. Now, my opponent, unfortunately, relative to the police, she's in favor of policies that would undermine the police. For example, she's in favor of doing away with qualified immunity. That means police officers could be sued individually. Most police officers aren't involved in shootings, but they have their hands on people, DUIs, in domestic violence. And if they could be sued personally, go after your house and your assets and your retirement, who's going to want to be a police officer? She's also for doing away with cash bail, which means more criminals on the street, more dangerous in our communities. And she also, in the defunding area, there was an effort to defund the city police in Cincinnati, go from 36% down to 25%. I spoke out loudly opposed to that. She was silent, would not stand up to these folks. One of the reasons that I'm endorsed by the FOP, the police here in Cincinnati, and also by the Democratic sheriff, Jim Neal, has endorsed me and not my opponent.
Ms. Schroeder, your response.
Thank you. Breonna Taylor deserves justice, and George Floyd deserved justice. And the best way to give them justice and their families justice is to ensure that what happened to them does not happen to anyone else. And I believe that we can be pro-public safety and also pro-fair, impartial policing. These are not at odds. We can be for both of these. And I think we do have to acknowledge that we have a problem with systemic racism in our country. I have tremendous privilege because of the color of my skin. And my life and lived experience would be totally different if I was a black woman instead of a white woman. And as the congressman mentioned, we've had a lot of experience in Cincinnati because of the killing of Timothy Thomas and the collaborative agreement that came out of that with the Black United Front, with the Department of Justice and our police force and numerous community organizations. We've made good headway here. We've banned chokeholds and strangleholds. We've had increased reporting. We have also had policies around de-escalation and use of force, and that's what I support having at the national level as well, so that we can continue to build on the lessons we've learned here. And I think Cincinnati has an opportunity to continue to be a leader in this space. And the one other thing I'll say is that to me, it's not just about reforms in strengthening police-community relations. It's much broader. It is also, we see injustices and inequities in our healthcare. We have a difference in lifespan of up to 25 years, depending what zip code you're born in education, in affordable housing, and access to capital. So we need to have a broader lens as well when we're talking about systemic racism.
All right. We have used all our time on this question. Thank you. Mr. Winstrop, what is the role of Congress in fighting racial injustice, economic inequality, and calming the unrest we have seen in our cities?
Well, first of all, I think that, let me just start by saying that I think peaceful protest should always be defended, and that is non-negotiable. But I also feel that law and order is non-negotiable. But as far as equal justice, I'm proud of what we have done in Congress already with our criminal justice reform and the difference it has made, especially in the lives of so many black males. But not only black males, but black females. It has made a difference. It's about redemption, and it's about fairness, and it's about equal justice, and we have done that. I also support the Justice Act. The Justice Act came out of the heinous events in Minnesota and what happened to Mr. George Floyd. And one of the things that I thought that event would be something that brings America together, because I don't know anyone who thought that what happened there was right. And the Justice Act was written by Tim Scott, one of the authors of it, Senator Tim Scott, African American, who has been a victim of racial discrimination throughout his life and even as a senator. And it was also written by a retired Minnesota policeman. And what we put forward there was methods that would enhance our policing so that it is fair, that we are collecting data, that we know when people are acting incorrectly, and they can't just leave one department in one city and go to another place. So there's lots more that can be done, but criminal justice reform, I think it's been great. But I also have seen so many things that we as Americans have stepped up. And I, as a member of Congress, have worked out with members of the African American community to find ways to talk about it. We can get them engaged more fairly in our society.
Ms. Castle.
Thank you for the question. I have 2 points I want to make to this. That the federal government can help by supplying the resources to law enforcement. I think one thing that changed is we have video footage now of these incidents that probably have been going on for a very long time. So now they can be held accountable. So we need to make sure that officers have those in place to keep them accountable. I think also it's very important that our leaders are role models in this situation. They need to not be saying there's fine people on both sides when there's terrorists here that are racist, and they're not saying that that's okay. I mean, President Trump, he's not being a good role model. He should be anti-racist and calling it out when we see it. Right now, we have so many people that want to do their own militias, or they are looking at the governor of Michigan and going to kidnap her. I mean, these are not okay, and that comes from the top. You can't say, liberate Michigan. It has to be from the top role modeling. You can say Black Lives Matter. It's okay. You can peacefully protest with people. It doesn't mean that only Black Lives Matter, and I think that got lost in the message somewhere. So I think these leaders need to step up and show that we can be united.
Would you care to respond?
Yeah, if I may, going back to the Justice Act that I talked about, one of the things that's in there is allowing for best practices. So this is at the federal level, but it's not a federal takeover of state and local jurisdictions. But one of the things included in there would be grants for things like body cameras that allow for us to really have evidence of what actually took place, and also allows us to collect data on what is happening when police are out in the community, and to make sure that we are doing things right and to establish best practices.
You have more time if you would like to respond.
Sure, I think that is important, and also having the information kept up, the data, so the police don't have bad records following them is something that we need to encourage too. And we need to encourage that the culture changes, that we do have restorative justice, and that begins often with who you are electing as your sheriff, and do they want to help with eliminating recidivism in the police with prisoners, to make sure that there's reforms there too. We need to get into the root problems of why these things are occurring, and we need to make sure everybody's at the table when these discussions are happening as well.
Thank you. Ms. Schroeder, what is America's role in creating lasting peace between Israel and the Palestinian Authority? Do you support the two-state solution or other path forward?
Thank you, Paula. I think America's relationship with Israel is such an important relationship as our primary democratic partner in the region. And I think our overall goal is very aligned here. It's peace and stability over the long term in Israel. And so that is the lens at which I look at this. I think it is very important that we continue to have a strong relationship with Israel. They're a partner not just in democracy and peace and stability, but also in our economy. In healthcare, I worked in global health for 12 years, and Israel's a leading partner in innovation in the healthcare space, and there's a lot of strength in our partnership there. And I do support a two-state solution because I do think that is a way to have long-term sustainable peace in the region. And I don't support BDS, and I think we really need leaders and having the U.S. and Israel partner together to work towards peace in the region is really important. And I think it's encouraging to see the normalization of relationships with Bahrain and UAE, and we need to encourage more of that.
Mr. Chabot?
Yes, I do support a two-state solution. Whether or not we're going to get there and when remains to be seen. Obviously, the Palestinians have been particularly obstructive in that. There's an old saying about the Palestinians and Arafat, who I actually met with years ago. They never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity, and that's very true. I was the chairman of I've been on the Foreign Affairs Committee for 24 years. I was the chairman of the Middle East Committee, and during that time met with not only Benjamin Netanyahu, but over the years I met with Ariel Sharon, I've met with Ehud Barak, Shimon Peres, and many other Israeli leaders, and been very involved in our relationship in trying to strengthen that relationship between the United States and Israel. They are clearly our most important ally in the Middle East, and they live in a very dangerous neighborhood, and I'm glad to see progress recently. Many people were saying that until the Israeli-Palestinian problem was resolved, there was no chance for improving relations in the Middle East. And I want to give Jared Kushner and this administration a lot of credit for accomplishing tremendous things that had it been the previous administration, I think would have got a lot more coverage in the mainstream press than it did. But to normalize relations with UAE, United Arab Emirates, as well as Bahrain, I think those are first steps, which hopefully one day will get to Saudi Arabia, which is the biggest player in the region. And the administration also needs to continue to work on our biggest foe, both ours and Israel's biggest foe in the region, and that's Iran. So the defense of Israel by the United States, our continuing cooperation is absolutely critical to peace in that region and really world peace. Israel is our key ally in the region. We must continue the aid that we're giving them. They should continue to have a qualitative edge when it comes to the military. They are just the key. We need to be there with them. They're our most important ally in the region.
Ms. Schroeder?
Yeah, I would also just acknowledge that we have work to do here at home as well in condemning hate and anti-Semitism and white supremacy. And it is incredibly concerning to me, especially as a parent, that we have a president who refuses to condone white supremacy. And we have people in Congress, like my opponent, who's enabling that. I mean, just earlier this week, there was an interview that aired where he was asked, is there anything the president has done that makes you question your support? And he said, there's nothing. And I think it is so important that we have leaders that stand up to condemn white supremacy.
Yeah, I need to respond to that. That's not accurate. If you look at it, I talked about white supremacy right after that and talked about it should be denounced, and I denounce it. Now, relative to anti-Semitism and hatred, we had an incident, obviously, not too long ago, a couple years ago, in Pittsburgh, where the Tree of Life Synagogue was attacked. And I met right here at this very facility with Jackie Congedo and with Walter Shapiro, and they were talking about attacks on religious in synagogues and Jewish centers, and funding couldn't be afforded. So we worked with our colleagues, both Democrats and Republicans, came up with legislation and passed legislation where there's now money available for those religious institutions, including synagogues, that are under threat of attack. It's $150,000 a year that they can get. And so that's the kind of things that one can do if they really care about it.
Ms. Castle, we turn to you. There has been a rise in hate groups and spikes in anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. What could you do legislatively or by example to turn down the temperature in this country and help return us to civility?
Yeah, I think I got a little passionate on that question last time. It kind of ties into that kind of hate. I was president of my church. I'm a Unitarian Universalist, which is a minority religion in many ways. And we had a very real threat to our house of worship. And I had to hire sheriffs here in Hamilton County to protect us. And at that time, we did not have the budget for it. We just had to come up with more funds. So with the grants that are available from the federal level are so crucial and need to continue. We need to partner with houses of worship as well, which we did get a lot of assistance and a lot of collaboration of best practices to secure these buildings and our congregants. So that needs to continue. I think too, like I said, the modeling from the top of being inclusive to all Americans and pushing back against any form of racism. My opponent has a campaign ad out right now that I don't agree with. I think it's dangerous to the Asian community. It puts a lot of blame on China, but that kind of the China virus rhetoric, I don't think it's helpful right now. I think blaming right now is not okay. We need to fix the problems we have, and we need to think about how that is going to be endangering people in our community, Asian Americans. I mean, so many people are susceptible, and we need to protect all of them.
Mr. Winstrop.
Yeah, thank you. I'll just start with countering something in my ad. China is a threat to the United States of America. And nowhere in my ad did I refer to the virus as the China virus. I refer to it in my ads as COVID. But lastly, I will tell you the virus did come from China. But going to the question that you asked, I denounce any type of hate group, and always have. And I grew up to denounce anti-Semitism, anything like that. I grew up in an environment where what was important to us was, as Martin Luther King said, the content of someone's character, not the color of their skin or where they're from, and to judge people from the inside, not from the outside. And to me, any type of racism or hate for any one particular group is, to me, a sin. You asked, what can we do about it? Well, let me tell you, I served in Iraq. I served at Abu Ghraib prison a couple years after the scandal there, and our mission as a surgeon there was to take care of the enemy. I don't think there's a more biblical mission than that. We took care of the enemy, and we worked with many Iraqis that served as our interpreters. And I can tell you, through my help and assistance and their desire and the threats that were against their life, and these are Muslims, they are now U.S. citizens, as are their entire family. One is a cardiologist at Ohio State University, and the other is doing family practice in Texas. You lead by example, you live by example, you judge people by who they are. And I think that that's an important message and hopefully a good example to others.
Ms. Castle?
I think showing up in all the different communities is really important as well. I spent a lot of time this weekend with Nepali and Bhutanese communities here and listening to their struggles. And I feel like people like them feel left out of the conversation. We need to make sure as leaders that the table's bigger so that more people can attend the table. And we need to learn their life experiences, because as a white person myself, I've had a sort of bubble, and I need to get into the uncomfortable place of learning about the pain of other communities so that we can start to heal.
Any final thoughts?
Yeah, one of the things about being in Congress is it's always helpful to have had life experiences. And my experiences, both as a soldier and as a physician in this community for over 25 years, you meet people from all walks of life. And you don't just work with them as a technician, you get to know them. Many become your friends, and you learn what their life is all about. And so that is important that outreach is there, and sometimes it comes to you.
Mr. Chabot, what are the pros and cons of the Green New Deal, and are there steps that you would support to clean the environment?
Oh, there are absolutely steps. I'm not only a parent, but a grandparent now. I want my kids and grandkids and all the other grandkids in our community to breathe clean air and drink clean water, and I do think that we ought to reduce carbon emissions and do things to benefit the environment. But the Green New Deal is a radical leftist agenda that my opponent, she'll claim now that she doesn't support it, but she's on tape where she's asked, do you support the Green New Deal? And she says, yeah. There's nothing else that matters. And so nothing matters like other than the Green New Deal. What does it do? Well, it's essentially a government takeover of most things that we operate with. Your home, the government's essentially going to decide whether you can have a home. Every home has to be retrofitted, whether we can drive cars and what kind of cars, where we can travel, even what we can eat. The cost of it is astronomical. It's estimated that it would cost about 70% of our taxes would have to go to this Green New Deal. It's $93 trillion over 10 years. Our whole national debt is $23 trillion right now. So think of how much that is. My opponent, again, is for this crazy left-wing Green New Deal. The AOC, the socialist from New York, that's her brainstorm, and a lot of people jumped on the bandwagon, including my opponent. It would also take away private health care altogether, and it would make a guaranteed income to everybody, which kind of sounds like a nice thing. Of course, somebody's going to pay for it. Guaranteed income for everybody, even those people who refuse to work. Think of that. Your tax dollars, your hard work tax dollars, going to somebody who refuses to work. And I could go on and on about this Green New Deal. I mean, it's terrible. And the last thing that we ought to do is pass this thing. And she's for it. She's on tape. You can see it on television with her saying she's for it. And I'd be interested to hear what she's going to say about it this evening.
Ms. Schroeder.
I think the congressman is confused. I am not AOC, and if he wants to run against AOC, he should probably move to New York. But I am not for the Green New Deal, as I've been very clear on the record. I do support meaningful efforts to address climate change. It is real. We all live here in this area. We have seen we're in a hilly river valley, and we have had 200-year floods in the last several years. In my own basement, I live in an older home in Clifton. I went downstairs last summer, and there's literally a waterfall in our basement because of water coming in. We are spending tens of millions in our municipalities to fix roads and landslides that have resulted from this. So yes, I do believe we need to take meaningful steps. I believe we need to rejoin the Paris Climate Accord. I believe we need to set targets of net zero emissions, carbon emissions by 2050. And I'm a business person. I have a Wharton MBA, and I believe we need to put a price on carbon. Markets work, and we need to work with our business partners to incentivize actions so that we can reduce carbon emissions. We're in this together, and it's all of our interest to protect our climate. And I would like to hear from the congressman what his, he says he supports clean air and clean water, but how? What steps do you think are needed to get there?
Would you care to comment?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, getting back to what she actually said, she said nothing else matters. I mean, think how disrespectful that is to the police officer, for example, on the street that puts his or her life on the line to protect the rest of us, to the teachers that are back in the classrooms and aren't sure about how safe they might be, to the small business owner who's trying to keep that business going not only for his employees but for their families, to the nurses and doctors that are treating COVID patients. I mean, it's really disrespectful to those folks. Now, as far as reducing carbon, we absolutely ought to do that. But, this Green New Deal, it's estimated you'd have about 1 degree lower if we actually implemented this 50 years to 100 years from now. And that's going to be offset by China and by India, who are spewing out 4 times the carbon emissions that we are here in the United States. So it's wasting all this money on her Green New Deal, or whether you just want to call her left-wing climate agenda, whatever you want to call it. What a waste of money.
You're out of time, but would you care to respond?
I would just say the comment was taken out of context. I do think that if we don't address climate change, nothing else will matter because we will not have an Earth. But I'm still waiting to hear what the congressman supports in terms of reducing carbon emissions.
We're out of time.
The private sector is already doing it. That's how it's already happened. We've reduced our emissions more than anybody else has on Earth.
Thank you. Mr. Winstrop, should Congress work on legislation to support expanded medical and family leave benefits to those affected by COVID? Or is there other legislation that you could help with so families could have some relief from the burden of the pandemic now and even going forward?
Absolutely. I mean, this has really been a struggle for so many Americans. And also, let's go towards benefits, and that's one of the things that we have worked on in Ways and Means Committee. I talk about HSAs and FSAs, expanding the deadlines of those so that with the money they put away, they haven't been able to use for their health care. And so to expand that. But medical leave, that really is part of what we have done in the CARES Act, is that if you have some COVID-related struggle within your family, that you can extend your time And we have to continue to do that until we get moved on and reopen our country the way that we should do it. That really has not been taking place to the level that I think we could do at this time. We've been very blessed that we have good therapeutics right now, and many people, if they're not in the more vulnerable categories, are doing quite well. So it gives us more opportunity to open up. And when we talk about what is going on with COVID, for example, and they say the hotspots, we have more cases. We are a country that is we're testing healthy people. And so we're testing more people also than other countries. So I think that we have to, as we engage in all this about reopening, and that would be a help if we are reopening more, that we're taking a look at how many are actually getting sick and how many need care, because those are very important statistics as well as we move forward. But in the meantime, yes, we do need to do more.
Ms. Castle.
I think the pandemic has opened a lot of eyes to problems with having insurance tied to your employment. I think of all the workers that don't have that, and we need to fix that. One thing to keep in mind, too, with having these payments available if they need to take a sick leave is the businesses are going to need help, too. If you have a small business and it affects your employers, you might have to close that business, and they're going to need support as well. We need bipartisan efforts right now to get that for the people. It is said that it's just going to get worse, that we haven't even seen the biggest peak yet. So that is problematic, and it's worrisome to all these families here. We need to make sure that Congress is stepping up. We'll have time to recover economically later. We just need to make sure that more people are alive at the end of this. So we need to do everything we can to get all of us through this.
Any final thoughts?
Yeah, if I can. It was really impressive to me when we realized the situation that our country was in, that we had a disease that was spreading fast and was dangerous to America, how well Congress came together and how quickly we came together to put together a package that would try to provide for people. We knew that there were going to be gaps, there were going to be things that we may have missed, and we knew that there were things we liked and things that we didn't like. And along that way, that's why the way we've had several packages, because we are trying to adjust to how long this has been going on and also what we're finding some of the pitfalls are. So I'm pretty proud of the work that we've done. We obviously still need to do more, and I hope that we do, and I hope that we do it real soon.
Ms. Castle, we have a little time if you'd like to respond.
It is impressive how fast it happened at first, but it's really discouraging how we're still waiting now and how it's kind of dangling in front of us. If you vote for me, then I'll give you more help, is one thing that Trump said and hopefully rescinded. But we need to get that help now. It is so crucial. So many people are off the employment benefits, and we need to restore that as well. Some industries are not coming back anytime soon. I think of the arts and theater and all those people that have worked their entire lives for these careers, they can't work. So we need to help them.
Ms. Schroeder, if COVID continues, how would you work to balance the need for more paycheck protection and stimulus and our tax hikes needed to avoid increasing the deficit?
Yes, so we do need additional stimulus right now. We need relief, as we've talked about in this discussion. I think it is incredibly important that we provide relief, extension of PPP for small businesses, extension of unemployment insurance, support to state and local governments. And we do also, I am a very fiscally responsible person. I'm an MBA. I, know the value of a dollar. And I think we have to be really careful about our deficit and not running up the deficit. Under my opponent, the deficit's gone up $20 trillion. And he also gave tax breaks to wealthy and large corporations that ran up the deficit $2 trillion. I do not support taxing the middle class. I support fair taxing. Right now we do have a system where some who are very wealthy pay less than those who are the least fortunate. So we have a situation, we have a president who paid $750 in taxes. We have cashiers at Kroger that pay more than double that, and that's not fair. So I do think we have to ensure that our tax system is fair, close loopholes, and we have to be mindful of not running up our deficit while also realizing that we are in a recession and need to support our economy to rebuild.
Mr. Chabot.
Yeah, the debt is growing, and we do need to take it seriously. That's one of the reasons that I introduced the balanced budget amendment. I'd like to say, I'd like to say that Congress is disciplined enough to balance the budget without having to have a constitutional amendment to require us to do it, but we've seen historically that just hasn't happened. So we do need to pass this. Now, relative to how we can actually deal with this, my opponent mentioned the tax cuts, and she said that, he voted to get rid of, it only goes to the rich, et cetera. That's just not true. We passed the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, which 85% of the American people had their taxes reduced as a result of this. In our community right here in the greater Cincinnati area, $2,400, which is what the average family of four had their taxes reduced by. That's real money to people. That means you can pay for clothes for your kids to go back to school, or maybe put a down payment on a car, maybe go on a vacation if we ever get past this COVID. So it's real money. And she wants to do away with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. It's going to raise taxes. And if you think that's just going to raise taxes on the wealthy, no way. It's going to raise taxes on the middle class and everybody across the board. And especially if you consider that crazy Green New Deal that she's for. Because it's $93 trillion. It's estimated that the average American family would have to pay $70,000 in higher taxes in the first year to pay for that. So it's just crazy left-wing stuff that she's for, even though she says, that was back then, now I'm against it. She was for it, and she's still for something that's virtually the same thing. And it's really unfortunate, because
Ms. Schroeder,
people have a right to know what we're for.
Yes, I'm not for the Green New Deal. I think if the congressman spent a little more time focusing on working for our district instead of misleading voters on my positions, that would be welcome. But I would like to acknowledge that one area where I think we have a real opportunity here is investing in infrastructure. So if we look back to the Great Depression, we got out of that with the New Deal. That was big, bold investment in infrastructure. It brings jobs, and it leads to lasting benefits in the community. And that is something we need to be looking at now. We have a huge opportunity to do a similar thing. And we in Cincinnati, the Brent Spence Bridge, we have so many projects that need investment, and that's something that I will actively push for.
We absolutely need to have the infrastructure dealt with in this country. In this community, for example, the Brent Spence Bridge, we've got $53 million for it. We got something called Projects of National and Regional Significance. There's a pot of money waiting to do this, but the local folks, Ohio and Kentucky in particular, and the city of Cincinnati, have to agree how they're going to pay the local portion. We got $5 million for the Western Hills Viaduct. We got $16 million for the Waldvogel Viaduct, goes over to Price Hill. Improvements Interstate 71 and 75, 74, the riverfront parks. These are all projects that we got money for back here in infrastructure, but we got a lot of things that need to be funded back here, and we'll continue to work on those things.
Time. Along the same lines, I want to hear from District 2, starting with Ms. Castle, your thoughts on paying for COVID, balancing the budget, raising taxes.
When Trump was elected, I wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt in many areas, and one thing that I could understand from the beginning was why he wouldn't show his tax returns. And that was something that was interesting, and I thought maybe as a businessman he would be able to close so many of those loopholes that the corporations were using, and that we could get more tax from them. We had a 35 drop to a 21, but it didn't end up there, and it's still paying like 11 for all the loopholes and the offshore entities that they hide their money in. So we need somebody to step up and push back against those loopholes. I thought he really would be a champion, and that was a big disappointment. We just saw that, it was for his benefit, and we see his tax returns now. We need to figure out a system that does work for the middle class and that, trickles up. We've seen the trickle down not work, and families are struggling. The federal government does need to provide that COVID relief, and we will figure out how to balance things later. I think this will be an economic opportunity, though, too, as we rebuild. We can have this new works progress administration with the infrastructure, with green energy. We can invest here in America with manufacturing in District 2. It's so many opportunities available, too. So I'm hopeful, and I think the government's going to have a big role to play.
Mr. Winstrop, your thoughts?
Yeah, well, definitely there is a concern, which how much debt we've taken on with COVID. Clearly an emergency situation where I felt as a country we needed to do that. And also, it was important to note that we're doing this at a time to allow our economy to try and survive. Before the pandemic hit, and when so many Americans were harmed and businesses were harmed through this process, we had, as I mentioned earlier, record low levels of unemployment, and revenues to the government were up. What we really need to do as a nation, and have the political courage to do, is to face what goes out as mandatory spending in our country. Because our discretionary spending, which is what we budget for, is a very small portion of what we actually spend. And in our mandatory spending, that just goes out the door without us even looking at it. We need to do that. We can do that and actually improve on Social Security and Medicare. But if we don't address mandatory spending, we're going to have a problem, regardless of whether we have this situation with COVID or not. But also, I have proposed that we create a tax incentive and a structure for businesses to be able to put money aside, like they do with the health savings account, tax-free, and have it there that they can use tax-free if a situation were to arise, that an emergency is declared, and they are able to then go ahead and use those monies. Hopefully, it won't be something as severe and as large as COVID, but that's an opportunity to allow our businesses and then subsequently their employees to get through it.
Do you have a response?
Yeah, a quick one. I think when you speak, Mr. Winstrop, to the people, you often use jargons and acronyms and mandatory spending, and people at home need to understand what you're talking about. And I'm worried about that phrase because that could mean that people are going to lose their benefits, their health care, their food benefits. One thing that happened here was people losing their SNAP benefits. And it was said that, able-bodied people would lose that, but they weren't work ready. The jobs weren't there. Maybe they had mental struggles. There's more things to it. We need to make sure that we are taking care of our people here in Ohio and in America.
If I may.
I'm actually out of time on this question,
All right.
but we do have time for a quick lightning round before closing statement. So if you could keep it to 30 seconds. I want to ask the same question of everyone because I think this is really important. Your thoughts, and we'll begin with Mr. Chabot, your thoughts and your message to the public on the integrity of the voting process that's already started.
There absolutely needs to be the understanding that every vote counts, and at every vote, people are going to just vote once. That's one of the reasons when Ms. Schroeder attacked me before, it's very disturbing that right now in Ohio, we have the requirement that we show them our voting ID. We show either a driver's license or some other picture. And Nancy Pelosi wanted to put through this bill is $3.3 trillion, and it took away Ohio's and all other states' rights to have that. So that's just wrong. So we've got to make sure that every vote counts once.
Voting rights are so critical, and it is unbelievably distressing that it is under attack right now. My opponent has voted against the John Lewis Voting Advancement Act. He also voted against support to the Postal Service, a standalone bill in the midst of mail-in absentee voting. It is so critical. Your voice is your vote. Please vote, whether, get your absentee in if you've gone that way, or if you want to vote in person, vote early or vote on Election Day. This is our opportunity to have a voice in our democracy.
Mr. Winstrop, the same question.
Well, the Postal Service is funded through 2021, and they themselves have said that, and they also have a large amount of cash available readily right now. But when it comes to voting, I think in Ohio we're actually pretty good because we actually do have to prove who you are, and you ask for an application to then get a ballot. In other places, you have people going door to door with ballots and getting people to fill them out right then and there. And then I guess that person decides if they want to turn that in or not. This is called ballot harvesting. It's taking place in California. It really leads to a lot of problems. Last term...
I'm going to have to cut you off.
Okay.
Ms. Castle.
Yeah, the fear-mongering is the problem here. I think we need to, from the top, reassure folks that voting is important, and we need to explain the ways you can vote safely and all the options. We need to make sure the post office is supported with so much more mail-in ballots this time around. So it needs to come from the top. So voter suppression is never okay. Everyone's voice needs to count, and people need to know that it matters when you vote. Even from local elections all the way to the top, your judges, everyone.
Right. Thank you. We do have time for our closing arguments. As promised, it's going to be 30 seconds. And because of the coin toss, we start with Mr. Winstrop. What would you like to say?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say thank you. I'd like to say thank you to the AJC and to the JCRC and to Channel 12 and to you for being here tonight. But, you know, as a doctor and a soldier and as a representative of this area, to me, the health and safety of our constituents has always been the highest priority. And I'll continue to work for a government that is more parental and caring and that applies equal justice under the law. And I'll also defend your constitutional rights and liberties because, frankly, freedom works every time.
Ms. Castle.
I think District 2 has been very much overlooked here in Cincinnati. We focus a lot on District 1, but District 2 is a part of us. I got to travel. It is beautiful and amazing. Right now, there's so much job loss and broken promises. We have a nuclear waste dump in Pike County. We have lost plants in Manchester, Ohio. So many jobs gone. There has been so much neglect here. We have some of the poorest counties in Ohio, and they need a new champion. I'm a teacher, a mother. I'm an everyday person that just wants to get to work for you, and I hope you vote for me.
Thank you. Mr. Chabot.
Thank you. Well, I'm committed to continuing to deliver the results to the people here that I have the honor of representing, like the PPP program that I helped to craft and implement that saved more jobs in our community than any other community in Ohio. And to get this economy moving, get our schools open, do it in a safe manner. Thank you for your support in the past and would appreciate your vote this time. Thank you very much.
Ms. Schroeder.
Thanks to everyone for tuning in. I believe we need leaders that rise to the challenges of this moment. I'm a Wharton MBA who has spent my career bringing business skills to public health, reducing drug prices, and expanding treatment. And I'm a cancer survivor who knows what it's like when your survival depends on access to care. And I'm a fifth-generation Cincinnatian who loves this community. I promise to work for each of your families as if it's my own. I am so grateful for the opportunity to be here tonight. You can read more about me at kateforcongress.com. Thank you, and I hope to earn your vote.
Thank you. I would like to thank all the candidates for participating tonight. Stayed very close to time. I didn't have to send anyone to the exercise bikes that are at the ends of the room here, so thank you very much. We hope this helps all the voters at home. Maybe there are a lot of people still who maybe haven't made up their minds. Hopefully we've helped to inform them tonight. As you know, early voting has been underway for a while, but in-person voting, 13 days away. This is crazy. It is time to think about November 3rd, and we want to tell you the polls in Ohio are open 6:30 in the morning until 7:30 at night. And Local 12 News is going to have all the results with comprehensive coverage throughout Election Day and Election Evening. I want to thank our sponsors and hosts tonight. First of all, the Mayerson Jewish Community Center, and they did a great job. This place looks wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you to our co-sponsors, the nonprofit American Jewish Committee and the Jewish Community Relations Council. We're going to have a wrap-up of tonight's forum on Local 12 News Live at 11. But for now, I'm going to say good night and thank you, everyone, for joining us. Vote. Stay informed.